Well, good evening again, everybody, or should I say good morning somewhere on the other side of the world. It's such a pleasure to have you join us today. We're excited about this topic. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Michael Lippert. I'm one of the associate directors here at Michigan Ross. I've been with the team for about 3 years, but I've actually had much longer connection to the university. I did my undergraduate work here in Ann Arbor and fell in love with the city. And 5 years ago this week, my wife started the MBA program. It actually was super fun preparing for this webinar, reminiscing with my wife a little bit about what she was thinking as she was starting school 5 years ago, and how sort of anxiety inducing it is. There's so much going on, and also some of the perspectives like, wow, I had a lot of support going through this process, and she had all these sort of tips and things she wanted me to bring up on this webinar that were sort of essential to hers, getting acquainted and feeling like making this transition. But we're all super excited about the start of school. It is incredibly busy in this building right now. We have a business plus impact forum going on in the upstairs, a couple of floors above us. There's a lot of people looking at ways to make an impact at Ross. There's just so many events going on. So this is a great topic to sort of discuss, like, how do you prepare for all this? How do you get ready to make this happen? So we're going to jump in. I'm going to do a quick overview of the Ross program. I know for some people this is their first time learning about Michigan Ross, or maybe don't know all that much about the program. So I'll do a quick overview of that. Then we'll introduce, we have 3 great students here today who can give some perspective on their experiences, and we'll have a panel, and we'll also take a bunch of questions at the end. So feel free to submit throughout. For some of you, this will be repetitive because you've done some homework on Ross and you're excited about Ross. But if nothing else, I wanted everybody to hear sort of the 3 things in our mind that are the key differentiators about Ross. One, we are all about experience-driven learning. This whole idea that you learn business by doing business. That is what we believe in and the ethos of our school in every way. And so if that really appeals to you, if you're somebody who likes to be out in the field solving problems, if that's how you learn best, we really feel strongly this is the place for you, partially because of our MAP program. We have our new Living Business Leadership experience where students are managing real businesses at Ross during the program. There's so many opportunities in that space. So that's the biggest differentiator sort of from an academic perspective. The other thing we talk a lot about is go blue, go anywhere. And that's referring to our career outcomes. We are in the Midwest, but our alums are all over the world. We have the most alumni in the world. And I love how, we place students all over the country and the world. There's a quarter of the class going to the West Coast, a quarter of the class going to the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. I was just talking to Andy, one of our panelists, about going to Dallas and making that happen. It reminds me of so many of my wife's classmates said, I want to go to Atlanta, I want to go to Minneapolis, and every single person I knew who wanted to do that was able to do that. And I think that's one of the biggest differentiators about Ross is that it's not just a brand that's strong in one region of the country, but really the Block M is strong everywhere. And I think that's really important as you look at schools and consider where you want to be. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about our community. I think it'll probably be a theme in some of the topics that come up today with the panel. But I feel strongly that this really makes Ross different. We are a culture of 400 students coming from 40 or so countries around the world, and pretty much everybody lives within a 10-minute walk of campus. It is as incredibly immersive a program as it gets, and I think we have, in my mind, a really self-selecting group of students who make a conscientious choice to get everything they can out of the experience. And I think that really makes the Ross experience a little bit different, and that extends to things like today's topic in terms of making transitions to something that's new to you, something that's uncomfortable. You really do have a community around you to help you through that. So you'll hear a lot about that today. Before we dug into some reflection in the student panel, I just thought it was really helpful to talk about our orientation here at Ross. Orientation at Ross isn't just everybody sitting in a room and doing icebreakers for a few hours and calling it a day. We have a really immersive student orientation that takes place in August. It actually begins in early August, even though class didn't start until September 4th this year. And so a couple of things I wanted to point out. We offer an analytics primer to catch people up on their quantitative skills and refresh those skills if you have more of a non-traditional background. And we'll probably dig a little bit more into that, but that's a really helpful resource to help prepare you for classes. We also have 3 comprehensive career action days. Those are led by career services, and they are deep dives into the entire recruiting process. It's an exciting opportunity to have Google and Microsoft and Bain and McKinsey all here in the first week or two of school, but it's also really intimidating. So those career action days are a great resource to get your resume in order, talk about networking, what does the cycle look like, and get you up to speed. Really, my favorite day of those 3 days is the last day, where alums from all different industries come back to Ann Arbor and give you sort of a behind-the-scenes look at the roles their companies are hiring for, what the recruiting process looks like in either marketing or healthcare or operations. So those days are an incredibly helpful resource, and we'll probably talk more about those as well. Last couple of things I'll mention. We had, for the first time ever, our Business Plus Impact Challenge with Amazon. There's really an ethos here at Ross to make a difference during your time at Ross in the community. And so you get to do that orientation. Amazon sponsored a 2-day challenge where you work on your leadership skills with your section mates. And this year's challenge was sort of a pitch competition for how Amazon can be a leader in the disaster relief space. So the first day was a deep dive with FEMA, Red Cross, and other disaster relief organizations. And then the second day was working with your classmates and your new cohort to sort of work through solutions and pitch those to senior leaders from Amazon. You can see the winning team here in the background. So that's a really great way to sort of prepare, to get yourself ready, like back in the school mindset. And with that, I'm going to introduce our wonderful student panel today. Makura, you're first up. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your background and what you've been working on here at Ross?
Sure. So by way of my background, before business school, I graduated from Lehigh University in 2011 with my bachelor's in supply chain management, and then actually spent 6 years in financial services. So first 2.5 years at Vanguard in strategy and people leadership roles by way of their leadership rotational program, and then as a leader of financial advisors there, and then 3.5 years at a smaller company called SEI Investments as a account executive and small business consultant to financial advisors. I then decided to come back to business school to actually make a career pivot, which quite a few of you out there may be thinking about. So I'm a living, breathing testament to the fact that it certainly is possible, especially at Ross. And that began, as early as my first year in terms of getting opportunities in operations and supply chain management, which is actually what I look to pivot in. So started by getting into the Tauber Institute for Global Operations. For my MAT project, I was able to get into a technology implementation project with Microsoft and their artificial intelligence group, coming up with new use cases or applications for their digital assistant, Cortana, and then was able to ride that momentum into my summer project or summer internship with Cummins in their aftermarket division, working on a process to help with their implementation of 3D printing parts, which they had never done before. So that was pretty cool to get to work on such an influential project at the company, not having any hard and fast operations experience, if you will, prior to that internship. So I'm happy to be here sharing my experience with you and looking forward to whatever questions you have.
Awesome. We're going to have to catch up later about your MAT project and your internship, because those sound both incredibly interesting to me and exciting. Christina, you're up next.
Great. Okay. So I'm a really curious person, which is one of the reasons that actually brought me to Ross, but I'll circle back to that in a second. So I grew up in Texas. I went as far away as I could to Massachusetts for college. I was a political science major. And that made a lot of sense for a few years. I worked on a congressional campaign in Texas, where I'm from, and then I moved up to D.C. to work on Capitol Hill. And it was actually that move to D.C. I was like, whoa, this place is really expensive. I do not make a lot of money. And I learned a lot about finances to be able to keep myself afloat, and I wanted to keep doing that because I thought it was really empowering. So I switched and moved into private wealth management, worked in financial services for a few years, still in D.C., and became really interested in fintech, because I thought that was the way to make financial services more affordable and accessible for regular families. And so I came to business school similar to Makira. I was looking at making a career pivot. I also just wanted to spend 2 years developing myself as a leader. You know, you only live once. That was one of the things that was really important to me. And I chose Ross in part because of the community. Everybody I reached out to responded to my email to call with me, connecting with somebody else. It became almost a problem that I had so much time devoted to these calls with Rossers, and I was like, stop being so helpful, but like, it's great. And since I've been here, I have done a lot to like, again, very curious, like learn and create outside of Ross. So Michigan has this like crazy community of other cool stuff happening. I ended up taking up a dual degree in design science. I joined the Baja Racing team, which is undergrad engineers and me, who's not an engineer. I help them build an off-road race car every year.
Wow.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's really awesome and like so weird. I learned how to use like big machines in a machine shop. And then I did my MAP with Experian. I did an operations project down in Chile, which was awesome because I love Latin America. Got to practice my Spanish. And then I spent my summer at Amazon. Actually, funny enough, in fintech, which is what I came to Ross for. I was in a currency conversion like product management role, and I was like, wow, this has come full circle. I'm literally doing what I said I wanted to do, which has been pretty cool. So yeah, excited about the second year, and I actually am doing a third year because I don't want to leave Michigan.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you mentioned that. That's one of my jokes almost, is that if you talk to one Rosser, you sort of end up with homework.
Yes.
So I'm really glad you brought that up, and it'll sort of probably be a theme in talking to people as part of this conversation today. So I'm glad you suggested that. Last but not least, what about you, Andy?
I think I am least in this company. It's hard to follow those two. I went to Principia College, which is a small liberal arts school just outside of St. Louis. And after graduation from that, I was a double major in business administration and economics. I joined Wells Fargo in their leadership development program in their wealth management division. So there's yet another trend there. We're all coming from a asset management background in some form or another. That was not planned, I assure you.
Also not required to be admitted to Ross, I promise you.
However, I didn't touch money. They didn't trust me with that. So I did internal operational risk analysis, which was really boring. And after 2 years of doing that, I transitioned out of that into an internal strategy role where I owned the customer experience for all of the online brokerage customers at Wells Fargo. So I was working in strategy in the fintech space and helped launch Wells Fargo's Institutional Investor, which was their robo-advisor platform, before coming to Ross. And then I came to Ross with the goal of transitioning into consulting because I had sat across the table from a lot of different consultants in my last role at Wells Fargo and realized that I'd really rather be on the other side of the table. And so that was the impetus for me to go back and get my MBA. And so while at Ross, that was the main focus of my first year, was on recruiting. So I did a lot of case competitions and worked really heavily with the MBA 2s to focus on that. And I had a lot of wonderful experiences. I participated in the Accenture case competition with my team, and we pitched a solution to the CEO and the C-suite at the Wounded Warrior Project of different ways that they could more efficiently onboard wounded warriors and capture more relevant information about how they can best meet their needs with the first couple of touch points, and with the goal of increasing lifetime engagement of those wounded warriors with the program. And it was a really wonderful experience, and we ended up winning the national case competition, which was fantastic. Aside from that, though, I also had a wonderful MAP experience where I was on a team with 3 other Rossers, and we were working in just about the least sexy industry you could think of, doing a really awesome project. So I worked for the largest commercial landscaping company in the world, but I had a really neat opportunity to really dive into this company's data and figure out what the customer lifetime value of all of their different customers are across all of their different business segments, and help them build a new model going forward to help identify which customers are going to be most profitable for them and who they want to be pitching to. And so it was a really neat way to help a company fundamentally reevaluate how they're going to market. And what was even cooler was they were adjusting this strategy 3 months before they went public. So it was really neat to be able to see some of the work that I had done in some of the press releases that came out about this company as they IPO'd. So when people say that MAP projects really do have an impact, it's 100% true. And so it was really, really a fun experience to be a part of that. And then I also had a wonderful experience this past summer at Bain Consulting in the Dallas office, which was exactly where we wanted to end up. My wife and I did when we decided to come to Ross. So I couldn't be more grateful for my time here, and I'm really excited to finish out this last year.
Awesome. Well, thank all of you guys so much. It's pretty awesome, despite maybe the similar work backgrounds, to have we have all different recruiting people in operations, consulting, fintech. You all came from different parts of the country, so I think it really sort of showcases what Ross is about. And so with that, let's dive in. I sort of broke up my questions into three, in my mind, distinct buckets because one thing is it'd be easy to talk about what'd you do the first day of class or how'd that go, but the reality is this whole process starts a lot earlier, right? And so I'm sure I remember meeting all of you through the application process, and you all struck me as you had done a lot of thinking about the process. There were reasons we were on your list. There were reasons you wanted your MBA, and that takes a lot of research, right? And I remember my wife going through. So I just wanted you guys to touch a little bit on maybe how far out did you sort of plan for your MBA, and what resources were you using to make sure it was the right path and figure out the right timing?
Well, I really like strategizing things. I don't know, I find plans fun, and similar to maybe other people in the world, I wasn't super jazzed about the job I was in, so this was like my end goal, like where do I want to end up? This is so exciting. And I started at like 2 years in advance. I took the GMAT well before I applied. I was sort of like, well, I have time now. I'm going to study. I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to see how it goes. And I remember like once for me, clearing that hurdle made me feel a lot more confident when I went to info sessions, because I would walk into a room and be like, okay, my GMAT's like in the range that makes me a real applicant. Like I feel like I belong here. And it kind of got rid of that imposter syndrome a little bit, which was a really good feeling. But I think a big part that I've already mentioned was like I just talked to a lot of people. I did all the website research, kind of cleared what made sense as far as like a big list of schools. I then just started talking to people, and part of it was what did they say about the school? Part of it was who responded to my email, because when I'm an alumni and I want to change my career path again in 5 or 20 years, having an alumni network that's going to help me and answer my emails is really important. Like that was a big part of my research process.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that, I think that's spot on, especially in terms of I think one of the best resources for learning about a school being actually interacting with the students that go there and the alumni that went there is actually visiting the school if you have the opportunity, because what that gave me a chance to do was see the relatively new state-of-the-art building that's here in the Ross building, Blau and Kresge, and really put myself in that environment, right? What it would be like to study there, what it would be like to go to class there, and that feeling of being home that was perpetuated by the students that I interacted with when I was on campus, and even had an opportunity to hang out with outside of the regularly scheduled programming of the visit in person day, and maybe go to a social event or two and interact with them, to get a sense for what life would be like outside of the classroom, because that's just as important in business school, as far as when you think about building your network, as the classes themselves are to getting you ready to perform well once you graduate from business school. So I can't emphasize enough, if you're able to make it to campus, how impactful of an experience that can be, and how informative of a part of your process that can be in choosing the right school for you.
I echo what the other two said. I think the only difference for me was I wasn't entirely certain when the right time for me to get an MBA was. And so I spent about 2 years before I decided to actually take the plunge and apply. I started having conversations with the senior leadership team at the firm that I was working with, as well as just different business contacts I had in senior positions, and asked them how they got to where they were. Was an MBA necessary? And at what point in their career would they have chosen to get their MBA if they could go back and do it again, to figure out how to best accelerate it? And through those conversations, it became clear that this was the right time for me to go ahead and get my MBA. And so I took the standardized tests about 9 months before I started applying. And after I did that, I spent the next 9 months building out a spreadsheet to figure out we're at business school, so of course it was a spreadsheet.
Right.
To figure out which school was best for me. And being in St. Louis, there aren't a whole lot of info sessions there. So a lot of what I was doing was remote and calling up different people, calling up the different schools and reaching out blindly to the ambassadors of the various schools that they all had out there. And bar none, I had the highest response rate from individuals at Ross. There was only one individual who I emailed over the course of 9 months who didn't respond to my email. And I tracked the response rate from all of the different schools that I was applying to. And so just that at first was incredibly telling. And I wish I had taken the opportunity to come and visit, but I alas didn't. But I'm still very glad that I'm here.
Yeah, awesome. Those are some of my favorite tips, and we're all aligned on that. One last question before we flash forward to, hey, school's starting. Hopefully all the folks listening who are applying are going to get great news in maybe, 6 months or so, and whether it's Ross or another school. I think one of the most common questions we get at admitted student weekends or, from some of my favorite admitted students over the summer is like, what should I be doing? I'm ready. What do I need to do? I quit my job. So I don't want to put you guys on the spot, or maybe it was just you had some fun, but was there anything you did during the summer and sort of in that space of, hey, I know where I'm headed, but I haven't actually arrived on campus or I haven't been to a class that you think would sort of be helpful for people as they transition?
I can start it off. I think the one thing that I didn't do that I really wish I had done was take a little more time off. I stopped working 8 days before I started orientation, which, while nice from a financial perspective, definitely didn't help me get in the right headspace to be as effective as I could have been when I hit the ground running at orientation. So giving yourself a bit of a mental brain break is really useful. However, on the tactical side of what you can do to help get ready, there are a lot of great courses on Coursera that you can take to get familiar with a lot of what you're going to experience in the MBA core. So just basic overviews of macro and microeconomics, finance, and accounting are useful just to help you know the language if you're coming from a non-traditional background, so that when people are throwing out terms like net present value and things along those lines, you know what they're talking about, and it just makes it a little easier for you to follow and keep up. As well, most schools put out a recommended reading list with a lot of great books on strategy, human resource management, negotiations. Picking 3 or 4 of those books from that list can really help put you in the right frame of mind to be thinking about a lot of what it is that you're going to be learning over the next 2 years or more if you're doing a dual degree.
Yeah. Christina representing.
So I did the opposite of Andy. I quit my job the day my 401k vested, which was June 1st, I remember. And I spent a couple of weeks kind of wrapping life up in DC, visiting friends, doing that kind of thing. And then I spent 5 weeks in Southeast Asia backpacking, which, like, I would, one, recommend going on Amtrak. I couldn't go because my sister's wedding was in the middle of it, but it's a great way to make friends before school. But I just took time and was like, I'm going to go explore the world. When else in my life do I have this huge chunk of time to go do something? And it was really fun and exciting and, like, scary at times. But before that, in, like, the April-May timeframe, when I knew I was coming to Ross and I put my deposit down and I was in, I also started poking around and getting ready for interviews and recruiting, which, again, I love plans. I love, like, kind of getting ahead of the game. And once you put your deposit down, you get access to all the Ross resources, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I, like, poked around the career development website and looked at, like, interview stuff. But then I took a break from that. I was like, I'm going to Asia. That's over. And then I got to school, and, like, we can talk about what, like, when you get here, but a good kind of head start. Yeah.
Cool.
And I was probably a hybrid of those 2 approaches. So I worked for another couple months after getting the invite to come to Ross. And then the first thing I did was actually I got married. So this was the
no big deal.
No big deal. This was the fun-loving part of the summer. I got married and then spent 6 weeks in Europe for my honeymoon. But then right around that early August time frame is when I started to get back in that business school mind frame. Like Christina, I'm also an avid planner and feel like every successful endeavor starts with a good plan. And so I'm going to put a quick shameless plug in there for a blog that I wrote for Ross over the summer. If you just Google my name, that's on these slides, Makura Compton, and then blog, I broke the interest I broke business school down into the three-legged stool that you might hear some students talk about: academic, professional, and social, and then crafted goals for each of those sections and prioritized those goals, and then went back to my application and the Ross website to figure out, okay, what are the opportunities that I need to pursue that are going to help me fulfill those goals. Number one, like what are those high level, those high level opportunities, and then, okay, how do I actually get those opportunities? And then that informed, the students that I started to reach out to dig more into what those opportunities entailed once I got to campus. So that's from the planning perspective. And the last thing I'll mention is from a career prep perspective. I thought the career development office actually did a great job of, so as Christina mentioned, once you put down your deposit, you get access to the Ross resources, and one of the resources is Canvas, where a lot of your class materials and such will be. But they actually put out a curriculum that walked you through how to look into the types of roles that you're interested in, what alumni you might want to reach out to, what students you might want to reach out to, so you don't have to go that professional part of the process alone, and that was really helpful.
Awesome. I love the structure behind that. I'll do you guys all one better and send out the article in my follow-up note to everybody who's listening, because it's a great article, and I love that you brought that up. I'll just give my quick greatest hits of tips, and we kind of touched on almost all of these, but I always recommend to candidates like mapping out your application timeline. You can do a lot of research on what rounds to apply in. It's easy to pick the right school if you apply at the same time and compare apples to apples, and also map out interview dates. And I think that alleviates a lot of stress in the early parts of the process. What I also mean by timeline is, we have a couple of people in the room talking about partners, and that's a really big part of this process. I know how I felt as a significant other watching my wife go through this process. And I think, sometimes applying early and making sure your partner's comfortable with the new space and feeling invested in the community is a really good way to get introduced and make a solid transition. Also, maximizing school visits. We talked about this a lot, but I'd also say for those of you who are international or maybe it's a little financially difficult getting time off for all the school visits, there's a lot you can do virtually. I love that Andy touched on this. We'll send out our list of student ambassadors, but over half of our class volunteers to be a student ambassador, so really take advantage of that. The last thing I'll mention is we talk a lot about, at least as an admissions officer, self-reflection and how that helps you tell your story. And everybody sort of wants to know how to tell your story to get into business school. And I get that that's a big deal, and it's certainly important. But I also think doing some genuine self-reflection and knowing what you want and what you don't want and what sort of makes you passionate and gets you excited about working will help you so much in recruiting. So having that part of your story tight and doing the right self-reflection in advance makes that initial transition to school a whole lot easier. So let's flash forward. You guys are on campus. Today's the third day of school. You guys lived that last year or 2 years ago. I feel like you guys are all accomplished in your careers. You were doing a lot. It's like back to school. That caused anxiety. I know how my wife felt. What was most helpful in sort of getting back into that groove of being in class and just feeling, okay, I have the schedule. What did that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so I'll start. In terms of, you mean the first few days after?
Yeah, or just even that first month. Like I know we were talking before, actually. That second week comes. You certainly have 4 group projects. Like just balancing time and feeling comfortable in the classroom.
Sure. Yeah, I think one thing that helps was the structure of how your class is split up, and this is something that I actually didn't know a ton about before I got to Ross, but you're split up into, I think it's just 5 different sections. It used to be 6 sections, and so you're going through your core classes with that, with the same people, with that subsection of the larger Ross class, and it really helped to actually chat with those peers outside of class. And we actually operated as a a support group for each other. So we actually have an academic chair for each section that puts together resources and materials and liaisons with the professors to make sure that everyone is getting the support that they need in order to be successful from a grade standpoint. Like, yes, that's important, but more importantly, to make sure that we're all gleaning the those learnings from the curriculum that we want and that we need in order to be successful, fully functioning top MBA students once we graduate. So I think that support system and making sure that I was kind of pulse checking how not only how I was feeling but how my classmates were feeling about the transition outside of the classroom really helped a lot and helped keep me sane.
So more like just
Tactically.
That's it. Thank you, Andy. I started using Google Calendars for the first time.
Yeah.
I don't know why I was so opposed to it for so long, but I was like, I'm a paper calendar kind of person, and then that never worked out. Google Calendar saved my life. I love Google Calendar. It kept everything straight. I actually, I color coded things based on like class, social, kind of like recruiting or like career stuff, and then health and wellness, which was like sleep and like lunch. I'm not kidding.
As important as it gets.
I have a reminder every night of what time to go to sleep on my calendar. But I did a pulse check about a month in, and I looked at the calendar because I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed, and I saw a color that like wasn't where I wanted to my focus as like the dominant color of my calendar. I was like, that's interesting. That's not what I came to school for. This isn't what I really want to focus on. I should start shifting away like where I put my time, and I thought that was really helpful to both keep me on time for things, but also to help me plan like my big picture, like Kira had said, my goals of what I want to do while I'm here. And then you mentioned Impact Challenge earlier, Michael.
Yeah.
It's great for two things. One, it's great on the whole impact front. For me, Impact Challenge was great for making friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like Kira said, we're in sections, about 85 people per section, and over time you get to know all 85 fairly well because you're in all of your core classes together. But in the very beginning, talking in class in front of 84 people and a professor that I don't know is terrifying. But Impact Challenge splits you up into smaller teams from your section. So for my year, there was like 27 people on my team. We worked together. Ours was a little longer, a few more days. But it was easy to become friends with that small group of people and then branch out.
Yeah. And
I'll always remember Impact Challenge as like when I made friends.
Right.
So, and that's like the first week of school, so it's a good time. It's not like it was a month in or anything.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned like your calendar. There's all these different buckets, and we're going to talk about recruiting in a second and what all that looks like. But there's, I always tell people you learn as much at Ross inside the classroom as outside the classroom as you do inside the classroom, right? And I really believe sort of skill development, leadership development, it takes a focus at Ross, much more so than compared to other schools, but you have to make time for that. Can you guys talk about like when you were here last year and there were all these Meet the Club events and sort of finding like how did you pick the right clubs, find the right leadership roles? What's like maybe it was just all too much at once, but what would like what did that look like for you guys? Because I think that's a really big piece of this.
So I want to build on the theme of really having a plan and being intentional, and I think that really helped me be successful in this. And so I knew what it was that I wanted to get out of my MBA experience. And so I gave that the first right of refusal for any club or activity that I wanted to go into. I wanted to make sure that I had enough time to dedicate to that to help me be successful in those outcomes. And for me, that was recruiting. I really wanted to change careers and move into consulting. I wanted to make sure I had enough time to spend with my wife, that we didn't grow apart at all when we were doing this experience together. And I wanted to put enough time into my academics that I felt like I was truly getting out enough. Because at the end of the day, that's truly why I chose to be here, is because I wanted to learn and grow. And so I had those as my main focus, and then I took about a quarter really to figure out how much time that was really going to take me, and I was probably a little different in that I started picking up more activities after the first quarter to figure out and flex my schedule and fill in some of those gaps when I realized I had additional time. And so that's probably not the standard approach, but it was what worked really well for me.
No, that makes sense. Cool. Well, I'll just leave a last couple of tips on these, and we kind of touched on these already at some point, but really brushing up on your quantitative skills. I always tell people MBA core classes do not teach you how to do accounting or how to understand finance. They're much more what the implications of accounting in business. So there's sort of a little bit of an implicit understanding that some of your hard quant skills are going to be up to a certain speed. And you'll have people with finance and accounting backgrounds in your class to help you with that. But I think that one of the biggest pieces of feedback we get from students is that some of that they wish they'd done a little bit more. And there's so many resources, whether it be mbamath.com or other Coursera classes, to have some of those skills. My wife always mentions like Excel spreadsheets and just kind of brushing up on those. Things like that will help you devote the right time in class to, to group projects and the conversations you really want to be having about the interesting cases or other projects. And I'll just sort of reiterate what Andy just shared and like this idea of what's relevant to you, but really think about the co-curricular experiences that you're excited about. Like I mentioned, the Business Plus Impact Showcase is upstairs today. It's the third day of school. The Social Venture Fund info session was yesterday, and they have applications due in a week. These are some of the best experiences at Ross by far, but they require a certain level of commitment very, very quickly in the process. And I think students can really invest some time over the summer or, as they do research about schools to understand what they really want. And that really helps them when they arrive on campus. Sort of the last bucket before we open it up to general questions is just, hey, recruiting. You're making a big investment. You're quitting your job. We've sort of been touching on little things here and there, but as we dive into it, you all did some research. You kind of knew what you wanted to do, and you were all successful. But so you all did something right. But what were the most helpful resources to just understand what recruiting in the MBA world meant, what networking looked like, and make sure it all worked out?
So one that I'm actually really excited about because I'm kind of on the other side of the table this year doing is FACT Groups. And so FACT Groups, it's an acronym. It's the word FACT, but it stands for something else that I forget. But you meet
Functional Accountability Career Team.
Yes, those teams. So
you'll never hear that acronym
again.
again.
Unless you ask admission. No.
Right. So it's a small group of MBA ones, usually somewhere like 6 maybe, who all have the same career goal. For me, it was tech product management. And you get put in a group together with an MBA 2 who was successful in that during their internship for recruiting. And you meet every week, and there's a curriculum. And this MBA 2 walks you through how to get this kind of job, everything from how to kind of tailor your resume, how to do what we call at Mission the Odyssey, which is to tell me about yourself, how to do networking, how to do sometimes like case type stuff, which is starting to creep into the tech world. Pretty much everything to help you get prepared for applying, interviewing, getting the job. And I'm really excited because this year as an MBA 2, I'm a FACT group leader. And so I'm super excited to meet my MBA 1 group of people that I'm going to walk through kind of what I did last year.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's a great extra resource that not a lot of people know Ross has, but every MBA 1 has access to it. You all pick whatever FACT group you want to be in, and you can switch if you change your mind, which happens sometimes. But I think that's a really helpful resource.
Yeah. One resource that I'll add from an individual prep level standpoint, and it might be a little bit unconventional, but so we all actually, glance at the job descriptions, at least read them over to try to figure out, okay, whether this role could potentially be a good fit or not. What I like to do is take it a step further and think about how I would actually attack the job in, let's say, my first 3 months, and actually build out, somewhat of a strategy that then informs additional questions that I can ask in an interview that are, execution level questions about the company and more specifically about the role. And what I'm attempting to do and going through that, walking through that process is to show recruiters that I've done my homework and I'm really serious about performing well in this role, and B, if it's not an interview, let's say it's an informational call that I'm using this approach for, source information from the person I'm talking to that will that is deeper than perhaps they've heard some other applicants, maybe at some other schools, go into. So that exercise has really helped me quite a bit. Put myself in boots on the ground level at different companies that I'm interested in.
I want to echo what Christina said about FAC groups. I think they're fantastic. I'm also a FAC group leader this year, and I'm really excited about that. But I think there's another resource that the MBA 2s provide the MBA 1s, which is really neat. It's peer coaches. And so it's these same FAC group leaders open up their calendars for 10 or so hours a week for MBA 1s to be able to reserve time to talk about any number of questions they may have about how to recruit for their specific field. And so for consulting, you have the opportunity to do cases with MBA 2s, or just have resume reviews, or talk about your cover letter, or just generally talk about your recruiting strategy with someone who had just gone through it. And there's a formalized process to help you do that here at Ross, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And talking with a lot of my peers at Bain who were at a lot of different business schools, they just didn't have that degree of formalized help that we have here at Ross, and I took full advantage of that. And I think that was one of, if not the keys to my success in recruiting this year.
Awesome. Those are super helpful tips. I'll just share a couple of quick ones that I've heard from a lot of students and we've actually brought this up a few times, but there are a lot of Ross resources you can use over the summer in terms of whether it be alumni, career coaches to do career appointments, resume reviews, but also there's like a career leader tool, like sort of an assessment to determine, on your experiences and your personality, what careers are really suited for you. And so doing some of that, exploring over the summer can be super helpful. This is my wife's tip, I think the most, but immersing yourself in industry news, especially if you're a career switcher. I think a really key piece of recruiting is not just are you qualified for the technical or core skills of the role. There's almost an assumption you're a Ross student. Recruiters know you have those skills. It's, are you really passionate about this company and why? And there's a lot of sort of jargon or ways to learn about a company. And so I think investing the time to do that in advance is super helpful, so that when you get on campus, you can really hit the ground running and have meaningful conversations. And then also, you guys touched on this, how important MBA 2s are in the process. Really build relationships with the rising MBA 2s who are just interning at those companies. It's the best way to hear about company culture. Andy was talking about going to lunch with an incoming MBA 1 over the summer. That's the way. My wife said, it's one thing to reach out to the vice president at this big company, but then there's a lot of pressure on that conversation. But talking to a peer who just went through it, who understands sort of the culture and what's going on for MBA's recruiting, that's a lot more comfortable and a lot more natural and can help prepare you for the interviews and for bigger discussions. So I recommend some of that. With that, we have 10 or so minutes for questions. One I saw came in already that I get all the time on the road, so I'm going to kick us off with this because I think some people think there's like a magic business book that'll like solve everything. And Andy mentioned reading some books, and we do have reading lists, but for you, for everybody, was there a certain blog or a podcast? I don't want to limit it to books, but were there certain, different channels or resources you use to just think about the business world in different ways as you move to the program?
So I'll drop a quick plug for three of them, two of which I knew about before school, and the other one that I learned about when I got here. The first is the Wall Street Journal What's News podcast. It's 10 minutes long, so not very long at all, but it's good for keeping tabs on a high level overview of what's going on in the economy without having to read the entire Wall Street Journal cover to cover. The second is the Skim, spelled with 2 M's, and that's more broad than the business world, but also brings in some political news as well. And then the one that I learned about when I got here was Morning Brew, which I think does a great job of breaking down what would normally be more complicated business concepts into. It's really geared toward an audience of our type of demographic, right? Who are undergrad, graduate level professionals, early, mid, and higher career level professionals. So a pretty broad audience, and have been really helpful for my learning.
I'm a big fan of the Skim and Morning Brew, so I feel like I'm doing well now too.
I would be remiss if I did not make a plug for Market Snacks.
Yeah.
So my section mate, Jack Kramer, section 3, sorry guys, Jack Kramer and his college friend from years ago started this daily email about what's going on in the market, and they say it's not a lot, it's easy to read, quick, it's just a snack, but it's also hilarious. It's just sort of quirky and kind of just, it's snarky and really funny to read. I laugh while I'm reading it. And he actually he turned down a full-time internship offer and worked on that project full-time this summer, and it blew up. He's doing great. So
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. We actually, we're getting a couple of specific questions about certain industries, and I was going to say we're going to do deep dives into certain industries. So there's a consulting webinar, there's an entrepreneurship webinar, but this is such a great entrepreneurship example. We have the Zellery Institute. I know Jack works with them, with entrepreneurs in residence here on his business idea. I'm a big fan as well. Jack's a Middlebury alum, like my wife, so I'm supportive. But also, you could get paid into funding through the summer, so that you can work on your own business idea or with a startup company that's similar to if you took a more traditional recruiting role. So there's lots of resources like that. I'm glad that came up. We probably don't have time to dig into specific recruiting and specific industries, but there are other webinars on those topics for sure. How about more generally, I think about there's certain companies that only hire students who intern at that company, or certain consulting firms only hiring for certain offices, or this company is on campus but only hiring for tech roles, not finance roles. That's really confusing, especially to somebody who's not in the lingo yet and not on campus. What was the way? How did you learn about all that stuff and figure out who is qualified and what companies I should focus time on? That's a lot of information to learn quickly.
So I think it's worth doing I don't think you need to go deep in any of these, but it's worth having a decent understanding of what's out there on Poets and Quants, of course, but also some of the Wall Street Oasis forums. And Reddit actually also has a ton of great information on that. I wouldn't go too deep down that rabbit hole. But if you're just browsing topically, there's a lot of really good information in both of those two forums, between Wall Street Oasis and Reddit, for people who have recently gone through the MBA program and can give you very tactical information about which types of jobs are recruiting and what they're looking for.
Yeah, I also think going back to doing reflection on who you are, what you want to do, what your goals are. There are a lot of companies that come to campus in all sorts of capacities, and it is confusing who technically recruits on campus, who's just here for this type of role or that type. But really think what do you want to do? What's your plan? And then figure out how to make that happen. Don't limit only these companies come to campus, so I have to find something that fits in this hole. I don't know. Just to me, it's figure out what I want to do and then make a plan to get there. And if they're on campus, that's great. If they're not, what alumni can I talk to get my way into that company? And I know one of my fact group leader friends, we were prepping earlier today, and he got a role as a product manager at Amex, and that wasn't a role they were recruiting for. I think they were recruiting for a marketing role, and he somehow weaseled his way into what he wanted, even though that wasn't officially what they were here for. So I don't know. He knew what he wanted. He had a plan.
Yeah, I think I'm glad that came up, because there's so many shiny objects. It's like the blessing and curse of business school, right? There's an incredible amount of resources and opportunities, but if you constantly get distracted and sort of lose sight of why you're here and what you wanted, and that's why I love all your approaches, because I think you're all very structured people and your approach, and I think it's really helpful because there's a lot going on and it helps dial it down. I guess just as one last question, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I think it's worth going back to, because we already got some follow-up questions. There are a lot of clubs, both socially and professionally, and how do you decide which ones to join? But also, it's sort of do I need to have a leadership role? Can I just join? What events can I go to? Other than having a great calendar, was there, is there a rhyme or reason to how you guys approached, which clubs you took advantage of, which events you went to? I know it's a delicate balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is kind of building on what Andy was mentioning earlier about being very intentional, right, about your club choice. It certainly starts with the plan, like you mentioned, Michael. But then beyond that, setting some goals for why you would actually join clubs. So for me personally, because I was doing a career switch, It was operations clubs that I wanted, operations clubs that I wanted to emphasize. So joining the operations management club, helping with the global operations conference committee, and making sure that I was maximizing the time that I spent with my Tauber Institute peers was really important to me. And then where I felt I had a skill gap coming into business school was actually in my quantitative skills, right? And I wanted to make sure that insecurity, or that either insecurity around that skill gap or actual skill gap, didn't hinder me from going as far as I wanted to go in my career. And so I zeroed in on clubs like DIAG, Data Information and Analytics Group, that actually work with companies, like in a kind of a mini MAT project, but it lasts for an entire year, to help with building that building my comfort level and my skill set within that particular skill gap. So yeah, definitely started with having having an intention in mind for why I would join a club. But then, in that first week when Meet the Clubs happens, vetting those different clubs that you kind of shortlisted to help you wind up at what those select few are going to be for you.
Yeah.
So you asked about leadership also. I was under this impression when I started business school, you had to have a leadership position in a club, and it wasn't good enough to just be a member of a club, that didn't matter. I think a year later, actually, what I would tell past Christina was that's sort of silly, because writing associate vice president of this club on my resume doesn't mean anything if I can't talk about what I did behind that. And so the thing that I end up talking a lot about is this Baja team that I'm on, that I'm not a leader in any capacity. I'm not an engineer. I don't know how to lead building a subsystem, but I do a lot of work with it, spend a lot of time on, and I've got a lot of great experiences out of. So I don't know, I'm a little conflicted, because I think having official leadership can be helpful in some ways, but finding things that you really do is more important to me. And the DIAG, the Data Information and Analytics group club, yes, it's a really good example of a club you really do stuff in.
Absolutely.
So that's something that I kind of wish past Christina had known and focused on earlier.
Yeah, I would definitely second that.
Yeah, I would. I think I hear all the time sort of that sentiment, and it's true. And what I think is awesome about Ross, and it goes back to where we started an hour ago, and that this is a real self-selecting group of people who are incredibly involved and who are, in my mind, all leaders. So you don't have to necessarily, everybody's a leader of a couple of clubs. Mercure is putting together the Operations Management Conference, and if you're sort of focusing on the tech industry, but maybe you have a long-term interest in an operations role at some point, or a family business in that area, you can still go to that conference. And there's so many resources because everybody's sort of putting in the same effort at that level, and I think that's really a Ross way of sorts. That's really important. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We do have a lot of questions that were coming in. So I think as a next step, there's two things in terms of that: connecting with current students. I know all these guys reached out to current students through their process. They mentioned it. There's a real sense of paying it forward, so please don't be shy. Also, we have a lot more webinars coming up that are deep dives into certain things. So if you're really interested in what do math projects really like, how do I pick a math project? We're doing an hour on that. We have webinars on different industries. We have a webinar next week all about living in Ann Arbor. I know we got some housing questions, because that's a big part of the transition, of course, right? So all that's coming up, and also at local events all around the world. We're still traveling. I'm about to head to Europe in about 10 days. So there's alums at all those events. Ask alums about their experience. I'd also encourage you to follow Ross blogs. Makira mentioned his post, which is awesome. Sujin, our admissions director, keeps a blog about admissions tips and next steps, and really sort of a transparent view of the process when interview invitations are coming out. I think it's a great resource. We try to be as accessible as possible. And then the very last thing is come visit us. We have visit days Monday, Thursday, and Friday all throughout the fall. We have plenty of spaces available, and we would love to have you on campus so you can meet more current students and also see some things firsthand. Thank you so much for listening. This was really fun to discuss and reflect on. And go Blue.
Go Blue.
Go Blue.